On the surface, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka seemed like the perfect couple. Both were young, attractive, and well-educated. Paul was charming and outgoing, while Carla was sweet and bubbly. They looked like real-life Ken and Barbie dolls. But behind their picture-perfect appearance hid two of Canada's most notorious serial killers. Our story begins in the mid-1980s in Scarborough, Ontario. Paul Bernardo was born there on August 27, 1964. On the outside, Paul appeared to be a happy, responsible child. He was an active member of the Boy Scouts, but his home life was far from normal. Paul's father, Kenneth, sexually abused Paul's older sister, Deborah, in front of other family members. Kenneth was later charged with voyeurism and pedophilia. Meanwhile, Paul's mother, Marilyn, suffered from depression and agoraphobia. She often withdrew from the family, eventually moving into the basement. Despite his troubled upbringing, Paul managed to present a charming appearance to the world. However, beneath the surface, his thoughts grew increasingly disturbing, fixating on dangerous fantasies and destructive impulses. One of his disturbing visions involved creating a place where he would exploit and control young girls. In 1981, when Paul was 16, there was a family argument. During the fight, his mother told him something shocking. Kenneth wasn't really his biological father. Paul was the result of an affair. This news disgusted Paul. He began calling his mother a slut and whore. She retaliated by calling him a bastard from hell. Around this time, Paul's first girlfriend left him for one of his friends. In a rage, Paul set fire to all of her belongings that he had access to. It was an early sign of his volatile nature and willingness to lash out violently. This event was just the start of Paul's troubling behavior. His actions would only get worse as time went on. In 1982, Paul enrolled at the University of Toronto Scarborough campus. Interestingly, another notorious Canadian murderer, Russell Williams, was 2 years behind Paul at the same school. As a day job, Paul worked for the multi-level marketing company Amway. The sales culture there had a big impact on Paul, teaching him how to be even more charming and persuasive. Paul and his college friends would practice pickup techniques on young women they met in bars. But Paul's relationships were becoming increasingly unstable and violent. He delighted in humiliating his dates in public. In private, he engaged in aggressive anal sex and threatened to kill partners if they told anyone about the abuse. Paul's harassment of women escalated to the point where, by mid-1986, 2 of his victims had to seek restraining orders against him due to his persistent, obscene phone calls. On May 4, 1987, Paul committed his first known rape. He attacked a 21-year-old woman outside her parents' house just minutes after she got off the bus. Over the next few years, Paul would go on to rape or attempt to rape at least a dozen more women and girls in the Scarborough area. His attacks followed a pattern. He would often target victims shortly after they got off buses, attacking them from behind with a knife. In some cases, he assaulted women in their own backyards. Paul became known as the Scarborough Rapist. It was in October 1987 that Paul met the woman who would become his partner in crime, 17-year-old Carla Homolka. Carla was born on May 4, 1970 in Ontario. She was described as a bright child and good student. But like Paul, her family life had some dysfunction. Her father often insulted Carla, her mother, and her sisters when he was drunk. Paul and Carla felt an instant attraction. Disturbingly, Carla actually encouraged Paul's sadistic sexual behavior. On their very first date, they had rough sex in front of Paul's friends, who watched. This unusual start was just the beginning. Their relationship would soon take an even darker turn, revealing the depths of their shared depravity. As their relationship progressed, Paul became increasingly controlling of Carla. He dictated how she dressed, ate, and acted. He called her names like fat and ugly. But unlike Paul's previous girlfriends, Carla submitted to the abuse and even enabled Paul's deviant desires. In 1988, one of Carla's friends discovered a disturbing list Carla had written. It included things like, "Never let anyone know our relationship is anything but perfect. Don't talk back to Paul. Be a perfect girlfriend. Remember, you're stupid, ugly, fat." Some believe Paul actually dictated this list to Carla. Despite Paul's harmful behavior, Carla remained loyal to him. She even tried to help him address his unhealthy desires. In 1990, Paul became fixated on Carla's younger sister, Tammy. He would secretly observe her and enter her room without consent, exhibiting disturbing behavior. Shockingly, Carla assisted Paul by breaking Tammy's window so it couldn't be locked. On December 23, 1990, Paul and Carla decided to drug Tammy so Paul could rape her. Carla stole an anesthetic from the veterinary clinic where she worked. They mixed it into a rum and eggnog cocktail, which they gave to Tammy. When Tammy lost consciousness, Paul and Carla undressed her. Carla held a cloth soaked in halothane over Tammy's mouth while Paul raped her. They videotaped the assault. Horrifically, Tammy began to choke on her own vomit during the attack. Paul and Carla panicked, tried to revive her, then called 911. Tammy was pronounced dead at the hospital. Despite the suspicious circumstances, her death was ruled accidental. The official cause was choking on vomit after drinking alcohol. After Tammy's death, Paul and Carla's crimes escalated. On June 15, 1991, Paul was driving through Burlington, Ontario, when he came across 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey. Leslie had been locked out of her house for missing curfew. Paul offered her a cigarette, then forced her into his car and took her to the home he shared with Carla. For the next 24 hours, Paul and Carla videotaped themselves torturing and sexually abusing Leslie. At one point, Paul told Leslie she was doing a good job and that the next 2 hours are going to determine what I do to you. Eventually, they murdered Leslie. Paul claimed Carla gave her a lethal drug dose, while Carla said Paul strangled her. In a horrible twist, Paul and Carla kept Leslie's body in their basement, while Carla's family came over for dinner the next day. Afterwards, they used an electric saw to dismember Leslie's body. They encased the body parts in concrete and dumped them in Lake Gibson. One of the concrete blocks with Leslie's remains was found on June 29, 1991, the day Paul and Carla got married. Leslie was identified through her dental records. On April 16, 1992, Paul and Carla killed their last victim together. They saw 15-year-old Kristen French walking home from school. Carla pretended to need directions, and Paul then attacked Kristen and forced her into their car with a knife. The couple's cruelty had no limits. What came next was a terrifying ordeal for their young victim, showing how far Paul and Carla would go to satisfy their sick desires. For the next 3 days, Paul and Carla subjected Kristen to horrific torture and sexual abuse, all captured on video. On Easter Sunday, they murdered Kristen before going to Easter dinner at Carla's parents' house. Kristen's naked body was found in a ditch 2 weeks later. Her hair had been cut off in an attempt to make identification harder. Paul and Carla's crime spree finally came to an end in early 1993. By this time, police had Paul's DNA from the Scarborough rapes, but hadn't made the connection yet. The break in the case came when Carla left Paul after he severely beat her. She confided in relatives that Paul was the Scarborough rapist, and that they had been involved in Leslie and Kristen's murders. Carla's family went to the police. Carla then struck a controversial plea bargain, agreeing to testify against Paul in exchange for a reduced sentence of 12 years for manslaughter. Many Canadians were outraged by what they saw as Carla's deal with the devil. Paul was arrested in February 1993. During the search of their house, police found videotapes hidden in the bathroom ceiling. The tapes provided damning evidence of Paul and Carla's crimes. At trial, the full horror of Paul and Carla's actions came to light. In addition to Leslie and Kristen, it was revealed they had drugged and raped other victims who survived, including Carla's own sister shortly before Tammy's death. The videotape showed Paul was the main perpetrator, but that Carla was a willing accomplice who sometimes actively participated in the assaults. Paul was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. He remains in prison today. Carla served her 12-year sentence and was released in 2005, to the horror of many Canadians. She eventually moved to Quebec, remarried, and had children. The Ken and Barbie Killers may have looked like the perfect couple, but their story is a clear reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Behind closed doors, in the privacy of their home, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka committed acts of unimaginable cruelty. Their case continues to raise questions about justice, rehabilitation, and the nature of evil. As Paul Bernardo serves out his life sentence and Carla Homolka attempts to live a normal life, the debate about their crimes and punishments rages on. Thank you for watching this true crime story. If you found it interesting, kindly like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more true crime stories from the dark side of humanity. Want us to cover a specific case? Send your suggestions to crimesabroad@outlook.com. Your input helps us bring you the stories you want to hear. See you in the next episode.